Hi, everybody, and welcome to Readers of Lost Art and Richard Grannon's Philosophy channel. I might have accidentally deleted it on mine on on the basis that it wouldn't be a video unless I'd done something stupid. But you should be seeing this on Richard's channel. If not, are you there, Richard?
I'm here.
Yeah, it does. It looks like it's not going to show up on mine, annoyingly. But anyway, yeah. So I thought. Oh, by the way, it is fitting if this isn't showing on my channel because this was due to be the 100th video that was going to be on my channel. So if I've managed to accidentally delete it, that is truly fitting. But anyway, so Richard, I asked you to read this,
Yes,
Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, and
yes.
just to hand it over to you, what were your initial impressions?
Um, I got a very, very strange feeling of modernity from it. It felt like a very, very, I think it's 1952, but it felt very, very modern. And I was getting overtones of Hermann Hesse, the Steppenwolf book, from it. So I know it's about race and institutional violence and America. But I got a very strong sense of the human versus an increasingly alienating and confusing modern world as well was another element of it that I was feeling.
And we have this running discussion whether you enjoy a book or not, and the validity of that question.
Mm.
But did you enjoy it?
Fucking hell. Some of it, mate, I was sat there going, why they asked me to read this bloody thing? I think it was around the True Blood scene. I was thinking, Jesus, God help me. Um, Enjoy it. You know what? Probably more than some of the other ones. I mean, it's a tough read, but then some of the bits that I maybe liked is a strong word, but I appreciated about it was it felt it had this sci-fi sort of a feeling to it. Like what was happening was so odd and unusual. It felt like it could only be happening in another version of this world. And so that side of it I liked. But it's hard. It's a hard book for sure.
And it's also the issue because we had an initial discussion, didn't we, about um, whether it was a fitting for two white guys to discuss a book. And then part of me just thought, oh, sod it. It just shows you how, in a way, we've become. We're supposed to live in a time where everything's open to discussion, um, and yet there is such. I don't know what the word is, but we're not open to speak about certain things in a way that in the past it's the beauty of literature in a way. I'd suggest that he's talking about things that are pretty much verboten in today's society, and he's talking about them in an incredibly raw way. Yeah,
Mm,
and I'm clumsily saying we live. There's a beautiful phrase. Theodore Adorno is one of my favourite thinkers, and he had this phrase. I might have quoted it to you before, but he said the culture industry, in other words, what we have surrounding us, screen culture,
mm,
commodified culture. He said it's pornographic and it's prudish. So there's an
mm,
oxymoron. And he said good art is ascetic, ASCETIC. So self denying, like a hermit.
mm,
It's ascetic and unashamed. So in today's world, you have Bonnie Blue and you have widespread pornography and you have all these things that suggest that we're a completely open society. There are no rules.
mm,
And yet, I would strongly argue that you couldn't write a book like that today. It wouldn't be published. It wouldn't be allowed. Any black man who wrote that book would probably be drummed out of his own community. It's raw in that way,
mm.
which begs the question: to what extent have we advanced or gone backwards?
Uh, I, w- I'm not. I don't know. Would he be drummed out of the community, or would it just be actively ignored and just neglected completely? I wonder, because the writing is very very compelling. I maybe not as a counter argument, but as an adjacent argument, would say that nobody would have the balls to write what he's written nowadays. I don't think anybody has the moral fiber for it. He did fucking well doing it in 1950, but then people were maybe a little bit tougher there and had the courage of their convictions back then. It wouldn't go over well today, that's for sure. It's not a politically correct book. It doesn't stick
Well,
to the narrative.
isn't that worse then? Let's just say you're right, and that no one would have the intestinal fortitude to write it. Doesn't that suggest that self censorship, given that the book is partly, we can maybe talk about this, but the book is partly about how you achieve self identity, how you find yourself, how you can go into hibernation, and how you can fulfill everybody else's expectation of you but lose yourself. And we can all take on these personas, but he has to go back in his hole and eventually realize, I'm going to come back out of hibernation, I'm going to try again. But the experience was incredibly instructive. And all the things he's doing to achieve self identity. I gave a talk on my channel linking it to Kierkegaard. And I'd argue that he's an incredibly accessible, well, I'd say accessible. I think he writes in relatively accessible way with themes very, very similar to Kierkegaard, who is incredibly difficult to read. And in Kierkegaard, it's interesting, he writes his philosophy under various aliases and pseudonyms. And there are various characters in this book, and he's never given a name. But even within not having a name, he takes on various personalities.
Mm.
And other people, he encounters all these stereotypes and people who go beyond stereotypes. So I think one of the phrases I came across was that absurd diversity gets referred to. Can you remember that? There was a beautiful bit where he talks about absurd diversity, and he's in favour of that, and he talks against conformity. And it immediately made me think of the times in which we live, which are all about DEI, which is all about what else? Uniformity of thought, political correctness, all these things that have been talked about to death.
Mm.
I find that absolutely fascinating that he's talking about diversity as an essential part of life and he's affirming it, but in a much more genuine sense. People today use the phrase diversity to achieve the exact opposite.
He's not talking about cheap diversity, though, is he? He's talking about authentic diversity. And nobody would embrace that today because it demands too much. He's almost well, no, he's at a Nietzschean level with that. I think he really wants to pull everything that's artificial away and just to have raw authenticity, which is much more demanding of the people who would espouse a philosophy than just wearing the right t-shirt and waving the right flag. So, before earlier you said, how would people perceive it if there's two middle-aged white fellas talking about a book about the black struggles set in pre-civil rights era? And I thought, I wonder how he would have felt about that. I wonder how he would feel even about us questioning that, when I think it's pretty clear. Obviously, it's brilliant literature. It's very, very well written. He probably just wants us to take it for what it is, and not and as a human experience. But you're right to ask the question, because potentially in these days, yeah, you can get in trouble for that. You could be accused of white splaining. You could be accused of all kinds of things. So the way I took it, and the way I thought the best way to deal with this, is just as from a purely humanitarian experience, which then drills past the cheap, easy to manipulate identity politics, more superficial levels of things. So yeah, for diversity, but clearly not for the cheaper kind of diversity. This gentleman stands for something else.
Well, he also got it in the neck because it's complicated, but there was a guy who wrote before him, Richard Wright, who wrote a book. I think it was called, well, various books. One was called Native Son, and that was about a black man who was very angry and violent and aggressive, much less ambiguous than the character in Invisible Man. He was accepted. James Baldwin was accepted more as a black writer, but Ellison, I think, was he had a bit more of a rough time from his own community because he actually tried to be a genuine author of genuine world literature standards.
Mm,
And of course, he was writing about the black experience, but he aspired to more than that.
mm.
And there are contemporary reviews at the time that are scathing because he was deemed, if you think of black nationalism at the time, was very strong. These are issues that he was fighting against.
Um, yes, there are a few comments here saying that
I'm not
you're
doing my best to, I don't know what, because it's never done this. Let's have another go.
could sometimes be a wire half out can make this noise. So if you shove it all the way in,
Is it bothering you? Can you hear any problems?
yeah, it's quite buzzy.
Oh, God. I've reduced the sound. Is that any better?
No, have you tried pulling it out and putting it back in again? Little Miss Sunshine straight in with, that's what she said. Ha 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 ha. It looks like you're muted. There's a little mute sign on your mic.
Is that any better?
Yes, I that's gone. That the buzzing has gone for me. Please let us know in the comments if that's.
Yeah, apologies everyone. It's been a bit of a, but this is part of the course with me. I don't do anything different each time, but each time the gods of technology decide to have a go at me.
Schmuck says pour water on it to lubricate the plug. Excellent advice. Excellent advice.
Where were we?
The sort of the cheap accusation that he's being a turncoat or disloyal to the cause because he won't stick to a rigid narrative. But this is a man who's challenging rigid narratives. The whole point is to challenge the rigidity of a narrative and the conformity of a narrative. So as heartbreaking as every single fucking incident is in this book, then the author himself also has to go through this heartbreaking catch-22 where he's not seen as a man, the character is not seen as a man by white institutions, and then the author is not seen as a man by the black community who demands, and black critics who demand something else of him. He needs to be a 2D cardboard cutout of something to someone, which is really tragic and ironic, but kind of fitting with the theme of the book that he went through. I didn't know he'd gone through that.
Yeah, and it's I can't help but think of it in today's terms. So there's a riot in Harlem, which isn't a million miles from the George Floyd riots, and I think it's the way he presents the Brotherhood, which I think is a scarcely veiled portrayal of the Communist Party at the time.
I can see that pissing people off. There's people I'm friends with who, if I suggested this book to them, they would be pissed off about that. And I think he's dead on. I think he's dead on. That the point of the Brotherhood is this fake Communist Party that was always a setup. It was always a setup by the power institutions, the white institutions, we'll say, to cause. It was designed to fail and to create more conflict within the community, so they could turn around and say, "Ha, look at how these people act." I thought that was brilliant, but very brave.
Yeah, and it had particular purchase with me. I'm trying to remember when I first read it, but I hadn't read it before I'd gone to America. And I studied for a year at U of Penn in Philadelphia in the year of, it was the August 87 to basically the following September. I stayed there for a full year. So 87 to 88. And I saw Louis Farrakhan give a speech at U of
Mm.
Penn.
Mm.
And for those that aren't familiar with him, he did the Million Man March on Washington. And he was a leader of a very odd organization because it was the Muslim Brotherhood. Well, sorry, the Nation of Islam. Sorry, I got that wrong. The Nation of Islam in America. And I'll never forget it to the day I die, because we're in this huge auditorium. And in the weeks before he visited, there had been an incident where a white fraternity had had some dancers. I forgot how you'd call it. Basically, strip artists had come to the fraternity, and I think at least one of them was black, and there'd been some predictable, mistreatment of the women. I don't think it was particularly. I don't want to minimize it at all, but I don't think it was actual any assault of any type. But it was definitely inappropriate, and word had got out, and this was turned into a racial issue. So
Mm,
there was tension on campus. It was an unusually tense environment. He came into this as a self-avowed black nationalist. And why I'm saying this boring story is that when he gave his talk, if anyone's seen the choreography that Louis Farrakhan used, he had men in very nice suits and dicky bows, and women had in Muslim dress with veils, and they acted as usherettes, the women, but the men stood in a phalanx on stage in a V shape,
mm,
and they were all around the auditorium. It was so well choreographed. And then when he started speaking, irrespective of what he was actually talking about, he was um, the way I'd describe it is, if you've ever seen the film The Jungle Book, the animated movie, the old fashioned one, and the snake, how it talks.
mm,
And I'm not even making it's hardly a complimentary comparison, but that's the only way I can describe it. I went there being cynical. I went there expecting the worst,
mm,
and I was eating out of his hand. And it brought home to me. The only other time I'd experienced it was later on in that year. I saw Jesse Jackson give a talk,
mm,
and the auditorium had been very badly publicized. It was a huge, almost like a football stadium, indoor arena, and he still managed to perform given this anticlimactic environment. And
mm,
both of them had this black preacher traditional way of giving a speech
mm.
that was, I think, for those that haven't experienced it, it might get lost on them, but I think it's one of the themes of the book, the way in which language is used and language manipulates people. And the character, the protagonist himself, is this guy who is taken on to be a speaker. The Brotherhood want him to manipulate people through speech, and then he's
Mm.
immediately dropped. And Ellison himself may not have been a public speaker in terms of this novel, but he was a man of words. He was reacted against by certain people in his own community because he was deemed to be too eloquent and too wordy. That was
Mm.
one of the critiques of the book. So there's this,
Oh,
there was this theme of language, and one of the things that I think Ellison represents more than any other writer I can think of, he's unashamedly eloquent when you could argue some of the expectations of him as a black writer are that he has to represent the cause before he represents literature.
yes, which is very ironic, isn't it? So that's him being dehumanized yet again, even as he's writing a book about the force of dehumanization. What a fucking series of catch 22s the guy is living through. It's fever nightmare stuff. Um, and it's really really sad. I didn't know it was taken that way. I really didn't. But I was wondering when I was reading it. I mean, it's at Cormac McCarthy levels of eloquence from the jump, from chapter one. And I was thinking, oh, okay, well, I'm going to read this naively. I'm not going to look up the date when it was written or anything about it, and I'll just see how it feels to me in 2025. And I actually didn't think, oh, the eloquence itself could end up being a problem. But imagine being punished for being eloquent. That's insane.
Well, because I think it's inverse racism to the extent, if you ask me, for example, what book does it remind me of, I would
Mm,
argue, well, I keep saying I would argue, sorry, I need to get, it's like a verbal tick. I get annoyed at other people's verbal ticks, so I'm now
mm.
getting annoyed at my own. Um, James Joyce's Ulysses is a much more difficult version, and they're obviously vastly different novels, but there is an element of someone returning to themselves and going on an odyssey of self-discovery.
Mm.
So Ulysses is the Latin version of Odysseus, so the Odyssey. And the structure of James Joyce's book is, I may do it one day just to make sure I have no viewers left,
Mm.
because
Just to
it is,
really kill them all off.
well, it's an incredibly difficult book, but this goes to, I saw the relevance of that, and maybe not direct references to James Joyce, but Ellison himself said he was influenced by Dostoevsky. Notes from Underground is an obvious reference, and it is a genuinely literary book. There's biblical references in it, there's subtlety, and it just made me think that not so much this, although it's partly this, but James Joyce's Ulysses, that type of literature with that type of depth, we're entering a realm, and it's something you and I have discussed partially, but I honestly think we're entering a realm where people won't be able to read it. I think this is still a book that's accessible, but not all of its subtlety and not all of its eloquence.
Mm.
That there are certain set pieces that I think will appeal to people. But even at the I don't know what you found it as a reading experience, but it's about what 550 pages. Ulysses is probably getting on for 1,000,
Oh.
and I'm not sure how long these books, what life they've got left in them, which scares the bejesus out of me because I think they're so important.
So in your sci-fi horror nightmare, it wouldn't be like Fahrenheit 451 where all the books are destroyed. In your nightmare, it would be that nobody fucking wants to read them or can read them.
Yeah, and I happen to come across I send you periodically these articles about reading, but I
Mm,
saw just a very puff piece about one particular YouTuber, and this will sound like it's just jealousy because he's got something like 1.25 million subscribers, and he
mm,
does book reviews. And they mentioned that in one review he referenced a current novel, and he said he liked the holograph on
mm,
the cover, and book sales within 2 days had doubled. And they also went on to, I think he was slightly pejoratively described as a stupid person's idea of a smart person.
oh,
So, but he went on record as saying for him Dickens is the enemy because he personally doesn't like Charles Dickens. And where I'm trying to go with this is that it's really middlebrow, lowbrow. And then you get into this eternal discussion. Isn't it better that people read something than don't read at all? But in answer to your point, my sci-fi dystopia is actually more subtle than you might think. It's not even that people don't read anymore. It's that reading becomes this niche activity that's controlled by influencers who are basically lobotomized but disguise it. So to the
uh,
extent that reading takes place at all, it's in the worst possible circumstances. I sound like Kenny Everett in the worst possible taste.
um, who's I've quoted him before, Bertrand Russell, and his quote about the point of a book is the pleasure of reading the book, but then also being able to tell people that you've read the book. And maybe we're moving into the second half of that phrase, more than the first half, where it's going to fall into a kind of shallow virtue signaling. People can sit in coffee shops with their glasses on, with books in their hands, and look smart, and maybe that's more important or it's becoming more important than the content of the book itself.
Yeah, I'll just give you one very specific example. So maybe we can talk about the Jim Trueblood, the dream sin inverted commas. I think we may have to be careful how we talk about it.
Oh, it's okay.
But when he they go to visit this shack, and for those that aren't familiar with the book, there's a Mr. Norton, and he's a white philanthropist who's gone to this black college that strikes me as quite similar to Howard College in the States. So it's an historical black college, and he chauffeurs this white man, and the white man says, I want to see some plantation shacks. So he takes him, and there's a guy called Jim Trueblood who tells this horrific story. He's impregnated both his wife and his teenage daughter, so they're both pregnant. And it's horrific. Jim Trueblood tells the story of the night it happened, and he calls it his dream sin. And I don't know what you thought. I normally don't like surrealist literature. I don't like dream-like scenarios in literature. And yet, sorry, it's this, someone's complaint.
Pull it out, wipe it, and stick it back in. I'll leave that to the comments to make of that what they want.
Is that any better?
Yeah, it seems to reset it. I don't know what's happening.
Well,
It
apologies to
sounds like
everyone.
a problem you get when the wire's gone a bit dodgy or is old or something.
Yeah, it's all tipped new kit. It's the metal plate in my head, most probably. So I was talking about this Jim Trueblood and how it's quite horrific, and yet I've got to be very careful what I say, because the true horror, I think, in the description of the incestuous event is that how relatable Ellison makes it.
Yes, and also, so that there was that level of it, and then there was the way in which this Jim Trueblood's ability to tell the story not only placated white folks, it made them reward him instead of punishing him. So there was that, like you say, the snake in the Jungle Book, this gift of oration. Listen to me, hear my words. The white man is like a ancient SJW. He feels it's his burden to, uplift the black race and help them. And he's frothing at the mouth, hearing this story when he's told by the young man who's driving him. He's like, I need to speak to the man who's committed incest with his daughter. I'm appalled. Goes up to remonstrate with him and says, how could you live with it? How could you not, pluck out your own eye with the sin of what you've done, which I suppose is maybe like an Oedipus reference. And the guy just is like, well, sir, come over here and I'll tell you. And he says too much. He starts with this long rambling story, and it's written in pidgin English, in the same way that, what's the Scottish writer? Irvine Welsh writes Scots. It's written like that. And Irvine Welsh plays this game as well. It's subjective. So the guy is describing the material feel of a door, and how when he was not with his daughter, but about to be with his daughter in a carnal way, it was like a dream he'd had and so you're in a story that has a dream in it. This is like NLP masterclass manipulation, to the point where he draws you into a subjective reality so far that the white man in the story, who's originally full of righteous indignation, by the end of it gives him $100 and says, buy toys for your children, because he's so pulled into the whole thing. And it's even I thought it was implied that the white folks wanted to hear the story, and there was maybe something unhealthy in the curiosity about it, and they were getting like a payoff from hearing this tale of an incest taboo. That's how I read it. That's what I thought the implication was. But yeah, I mean, Ellison does do a good job of dragging you into that world, but it's got multiple layers to it. We see the white guy is like, oh yeah, actually I understand more. The young black man is horrified because he's feeling this constant emotional flashback of guilt and shame by association. He's like, he's going to think all black people do this. And even within the story that Jim Trueblood tells, when white folks hear about it, they say, leave him to it. That's how these N words are. Just leave him to it. And then the not the author, but the young man who's telling the story from his subjective point of view, he's full of revulsion and self-hatred for it, and can't look. He can't look up. He's staring at their shoes to try and avoid the pain of the situation. And every once in a while, he says to the white man, we should get on. We should leave. We should go. And the white man's like, nope, I want to hear this all the way through to the end. And the farmer's happy to tell him. Jim Trueblood is happy. There's something salacious. He knows he's caught him. He knows he's got him in his web, and he's like, okay, here's another white man on the hook. I'm going to give him the full. I'm going to give him the full thing, the full payoff. It's not a sexually graphic story, but it becomes violent. It's quite graphic in terms of violence when his wife catches him in the act. I think that's right, isn't it?
Yeah, and the symbolism, it's heavy on symbolism, and that's the way I think he insulates himself as an author from being accused of being salacious himself. But it's also there's two layers because you're talking about layers, but there's layers within layers. So I think there's a dissociative state that Jim Trueblood goes into. He
Mm,
calls it the dream sin, and the way
mm,
it's described, if it was true, then it's some tiny mitigating circumstance. If it happened and if it started happening in a dream, and then he describes the way in which he can't stop in a psychologically horrifyingly real way.
mm, mm,
So there's that. There's the relationship of Jim Trueblood to the truth of what happened and the extent to which he accepts it. There's the relationship of Jim Trueblood to his new status as a purveyor of a salacious tale that becomes financially rewarding. He makes more money from that than he's ever made in his life, and it's the worst
mm.
thing he's ever done.
Yeah.
And then there's the added layer that Mr. Norton, the rich white guy, prior to all of this, I think it's prior, or maybe, yeah, it must be prior. He shows a locket of his own daughter who died. He went on a tour. I think they said they were in Venice or Italy,
Italy, yachting.
and his daughter died. And I would ponder whether that's actually there's the implication that he had slightly incestuous yearnings for his own daughter, and he sees Jim Trueblood as having done the thing that he would never have been able to.
Mm.
There's that. I think that's at least an implied meaning.
100%. 100%. Yeah, there's no the Jim Trueblood in the story, he even says, I looked at the girl's mother. I can't remember the girl's name. It's not Katie or Catty or something like that. And he says he looks across at the girl's mother, and his daughter is like her mother was when she was younger, but more beautiful. And somehow this is woven into the narrative, and nobody listening to it is like, dude, stop. The young black man is just freezing with shame, and the white guy, I think like you do. I think there's this salacious desire to. It's almost like a description of pornography and how the pornographic instinct can be outsourced to bad people. He's black. He's a farmer. He lives in a shack. He's ill-educated. He doesn't know any better. So we want this thing, but we don't want to carry the burden of creating the thing ourselves. So it's I wonder if he's pointing to how communally, this is something you always remind me to explore more, and I always forget. I never do the scapegoating. So we need someone to carry this. Who's going to carry it? This poor black man will carry it, and maybe that's why all the white people pay him so much, and maybe unconsciously, it's gratitude for carrying the sin, which they don't want rid of. They want it, but they don't want to carry it themselves. Unless I've drifted off too far into
No,
psychoanalytic.
but I also think yet another layer is Jim Trueblood is also a scapegoat in the sense that he is living out the stereotype of the stupid peasant black guy
Yeah,
that the white people want and are emotionally invested in.
yeah. But he's not.
And
He's not. He's not stupid. That well, he's not. Obviously, he's not an intellect in the book, but he's wily. He knows what he's doing.
yeah, but he's making the most of his situation in a way. He's the mirror image of Dr. Bledsoe, the president of the university, who
Yes.
basically has found himself in a niche and he makes of it what he can, and he bows and scrapes to white philanthropists, but he argues to himself that actually I'm the one in control.
That when I read that, I was thinking, yes, I can see some black people at that time would have found that offensive because he was saying, I'm a black propagandist and I'm using white people. And yes, I'm deceptive, but I have power. I tell them how to think, and I let them think they're telling me how to think. And I think what possibly could offend, and I do mean that's offensive, is the idea that any black man in an educational institution could have that kind of power. Maybe there's something that goes outside of the proper narrative. It's a very rebellious. What do you call that when an idea is rebellious? Fuck, I can't remember. It'll come to me. It turns things on its head in a way that's
Iconoclastic.
uncomfortable. Say again.
Iconoclastic, maybe.
Jesus, I'm not clever enough to say things like that. Iconic, but thank you for the credit of thinking I would. You go ahead. I need to pull this out of my brain. I can't think what the word is. But
No,
that
just
was I saw that as being potentially offensive in inverted commas.
yeah, because I'm just building on your point about layers. It's whilst all the Jim Trueblood stuff's going on, I in the middle of all this, there's just a throwaway line that he stands on a tin apple. There's some flattened apple tin object. I might have been one of the kids' toys or something on
Yeah,
the ground, and there's the whole apple Garden of Eden, the whole college campus, and I've experienced this having worked most of my professional life on college campuses. They are like Edenic environments. They're campuses for a reason. They're off out. Even in the ones I've worked in have been in major cities, but they're isolated little oases within a thriving metropolis where the world is artificial. You're taking 3 or 4 years out of your life in this cosseted environment, and it is Edenic. And he's pushed out of that in the worst possible way by this black president who's gone out of his way to destroy the future. And to go back to the Jim Trueblood, the protagonist's biggest sin is that he's intelligent and independent. And Dr. Bledsoe cannot tolerate that.
that's interesting. The word I was looking for before was subversive. Sorry. I don't know what's wrong with me today. Yes, so the author is clearly. I mean, I would argue that's a preemptive steel man against what he knows he's going to face when the book is released, possibly either consciously or unconsciously. His biggest sin is his eloquence, is his intelligence, and the fact that he's a free thinker. And he's obviously he doesn't just want to join a team. This isn't a guy who's saying, let's just build a team, get together and bang the same drum, fly the same flags. He's like, no, we should really wake up. I think it's a call more for the harder option, the individual enlightenment against the brutality of what seems like an inescapable system. It's interesting you said about the apple, because after I was reading the book last night and fell asleep, I started to have nightmares about being trapped inside of an apple. So that was yeah, it was interesting. I think because everything feels like a closed circuit. Yeah, like no matter what you do, you're you're going to be punished. It's like Gregory Bateson's double bind theory of schizophrenia. You're being asked to do things, but you're not being given the equipment with which to do things properly. And so you are guaranteed to be punished no matter what you do. But at another level, you're not allowed to say that that's happening. And at another level, you can't complain about it. And so you just go insane and dissociate and become invisible.
But you know what? Our ongoing discussion about why literature is important, I propose that that is the key element of the book and its value, because especially in the epilogue, which I think you could publish the epilogue separately as a Kierkegaardian statement of identity that's much more accessible, I could repeat, than Kierkegaard itself. And in that expression, I just think it's so beautifully done. And it's that life doesn't make sense. Life is arbitrary. Life cannot be controlled. The Brotherhood they use the word scientific all the time.
Hmm.
And he's making the point that both cultural stereotypes aren't that they've got elements of truth, but you can't reduce people to stereotypes. You can't reduce people to scientific categories. life is inherently more complicated. And it goes right back to, I think, one of the key elements of the book that appeals to me most is the way in which, amidst all this eloquence and the big words and the complex references and the layers, at the heart of it, introduced right at the beginning, is the grandfather who's got this Uncle Remus like peasant canniness. And I don't know whether you remember the dream, talking about nightmares and dreams, but he has this recurrent dream of his grandfather asking him to open an envelope. And there's endless envelopes, and he says, "Them's the years," meaning that's the passage of time.
Yeah.
And at the end, when he finally gets to this gold embossed card, it says, "Keep this N word running."
Yeah.
And keeping people running in this double bind that you've referred to, the Gregory Bateson idea, that ultimately is what life is. There
Mm.
are no easy answers. There are no all encompassing ideologies that will make perfect sense. There is no path you can take that will give you total fulfillment. You'll never have heartache. That there is, it's almost the antithesis of what today's influencer culture promises you. He's actually saying, finding yourself at one point in the novel, he finds himself in a coal bunker. He's fallen into a coal bunker and he can't be seen because it's night. He's got black skin and he's in the bottom of a coal bunker. And there's actually, to go on a complete tangent, there's a Hungarian saying, there's a novel I read by a Hungarian guy called Under the Frog. And the Hungarian saying is the worst place in the world is at the bottom of a coal mine under the arse of a frog. And it made me think of that when he's in this bunker where all the coal is and he can't be seen.
Mm.
And that's the other theme that goes with life is arbitrary. You cannot be seen even by your own people. So he's not seen by fellow black people, he's not seen by white people who want to oppress him, or he's only seen as a stereotype. So there's the invisibility, there's the arbitrariness of life, but all of these things go beyond race. And that's why I think the epilogue in particular is just genius, because he's basically making this life statement about this is what the existential human condition is for everybody. The waters get muddied by issues about race, by exploitation, by politics. But ultimately, another underlying theme is Ellison's faith in democracy, and if not democracy in practice, the principle, I think he refers to the principle a few times, the concept that, especially the American Constitution, because it's written down, and in idealistic terms, it's such a beautiful aspirational document. And Ellison seems to be saying, irrespective of how much that document's abused, that is the future for all peoples of all races. And it's quite simultaneously life affirming. He's saying his grandfather, for all his cynicism, and he says, doesn't he say, yes them until you destroy them?
Yeah.
You have to play a role. But it's almost like this Moses, like he wants to see the promised land where everyone doesn't have to play a role and everyone can be honest. But in the meantime, you have to play these roles. Life is arbitrary. You won't be seen. And all of this, and simultaneously, he's aspiring for something better.
Yeah.
And all of this is in such a complex mix. And I defy you to give me an example of anything in popular culture or anything online that approaches that level of psychological realism, harsh truth, cynicism with optimism baked in. It's just incredibly complex and aspirational and cynical, and all these things wound together in a way that I'd argue only literature, good literature, can do.
I can give you an example of work online that does that. It's called Readers of the Lost Art, and it features this curmudgeonly scout chap who left academia in a state of mind dungeon. No, I hear you. I think there are people out there doing it. They're just massively ignored because as we've become less literate, and we've dropped in our interiority, we become more and more vessels for messaging and message signaling. And I think there just isn't patience for that. I know that from working online with social media and doing online courses. People want the message to be loud, clear, and consistent from the get-go. And if it's ambiguous, they will ignore you. They won't fight you. They'll just fucking ignore you because they don't have the bandwidth. They're not going to figure out what subtle, nuanced point you're trying to make. You're either on team red or team blue. If you're team red, you can do or say anything. I'm going to cheer you on because I'm team red. If you're on team blue, fuck you. You can do or say anything, and it's fuck you because it's just easier for me like this. I've absolved myself of the responsibility of needing to think, of needing to make decisions because
I
it's
can
painful.
totally see why superficially it's easier and it's appealing. But by the same token, would you? Maybe I'm being delusional. This is the only thing that gives me hope. I honestly think most people understand at either a subconscious or subliminal level that what they're seeking won't be found in shallow influences.
I think
But
that's why
they do it anyway. But
yeah.
deep down, they know it's not the answer, but they keep doing it.
I think that's the reason why the mental health crisis is so bad at the moment, is because people are addicted to a thing. They think, talk, and act as though it's going to lead them to some utopia, but on a deeper, more primal, animalistic level, they know perfectly well it can't. It's not that it won't; it's that it fucking can't. You just feel it. You know it can't take you anywhere. You know these people can't help you. You know on some level they don't care about you. They're not trying to help you. They're trying to help themselves. So in your cynicism, you say, okay, well, nobody can be helped. What can I do? I can aspire to be like them. I can aspire to be a con artist at the level of con artistry that they're engaging in. And that's the end of my aspiration. I don't think there's any more authentic utopianism left. I really don't. I don't, in 2025, moving into 2026, I don't think naive utopianism as it used to be exists. I think it's a much worse problem. It's a very, 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 very deep, dark cynicism masquerading as performative utopianism, but people know it's not going to do anything. It's all just power grabs.
But I don't take this down a controversial line, but it's also intrigued me the notion of therapy and people's reliance upon it. And I'm thinking of someone like Woody Allen, who perhaps isn't the best example, but he's probably been in therapy for 40 years. And the point that should be obvious is that part of the therapeutic encounter that it's baked in that you basically it's never going to work, it's just going to ameliorate your situation.
I think Woody Allen proves that what therapy allows you to do is to talk about and justify marrying your own adopted daughter. So
Mm.
let's get to it, kids.
But again, that's what with reference to this book, what's so powerful about it. If you basically said, you mentioned Team Red and Team Blue, if you said Ralph Ellison, whose side are you on? It would be difficult to get a strong sense because he portrays everybody so honestly.
I think he hates sides. Unless I'm projecting, I got a very strong Nietzsche vibe from him. I think he hates sides. I think he thinks people withdrawing into cheap tribalism doesn't matter. The tribe doesn't give a shit. He thinks it's weak. He thinks it's cowardly, and I think that's one of the messages of the book. And I think that's why there's such strong violence in the book. I think that's the author's rage at this cheap, cowardly withdrawal into plastic tribalism.
Yeah, and so I didn't finish my point about the apple and the tin apple, and the idea was that's not a very obvious reference to the Garden of Eden, but later on, I think it's towards the end of the book, he makes reference to, you've heard me use this quote, through a glass darkly. I think it's from Corinthians, what is it, 1:13? The idea that when you eventually meet God, you will see clearly, but everything you will see up until then will be like through a glass darkly, and it's like through a frosted glass or through a misted mirror.
Mm.
And when you know that context to that quote, and when you have some biblical knowledge, that's just one little example of how other avenues of meaning open up in Ellison's book.
Mm.
And this is my point about my fear. So James Joyce with Ulysses, I made the comparison. James Joyce used to joke about he had so many references in Ulysses that it would keep the academics busy for decades. And he did that quite malevolently. But Ellison's doing something different, and it saddens me that even something as relatively accessible as Ellison's book, in 10, 20, 30 years, even if political correctness doesn't do away with that book and people's willingness to read it, some of the references, the eloquence itself, I think, will be off putting to some people, even though that was what I absolutely adore about the book.
Yeah.
There are little segments. I've done a couple of videos on it already, and I could just keep doing video after video, reading quotes that are so beautifully written.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, how long have we got before generationally people won't be able to read this stuff? Back to your idea about, Fahrenheit 451.
Uh, Maybe about 5, 10 years. Not long. I don't think it's very. I don't think it's very far off in the future before people won't be able to do it. There's a group of people I used to talk to when I was teaching self-defense. They're Navy SEALs and they're ex-Navy SEALs, and they ran a training company, and they would write articles regularly, which were effectively like soft sales pitches for their training company. And they would criticize the mainstream American military, and they would say they would call it common denominator training, and it's a bit like the IQ score. We reset the IQ based on what most people are up to. So then you have your average IQ score. And they said to do that in the military is a mistake, because what you end up with is, say, it's a pistol shooting. If pistol shooting is always reset year on year to the lowest, so that the lowest common denominator can do it and can get through, you end up with a weakening of skills and strengths. I know you're not particularly interested in the Navy SEALs, but if you look at it as a kind of a focus on skill and strength and discipline and capacity, you can apply that same principle to literature, which is you're right with what you said before. It was when you were saying that, I don't know, an influencer hates Dickens and that's it. Dickens is off. That's done. And there are books that we should read. And if it's too hard or too difficult or too weird or too challenging or has a long, dreamlike, psychedelic description of incest, we should just turn away from it. Whereas I think the position I'm getting from you is no, it's the harder literature that people should be focused on. It's the harder training, quote unquote, training to develop literacy and an interiority that's better, that's more justifiable.
Well, to back up my point, Ellison, I think it's an essay, forgive me if I've misremembered, but it's called Shadow and the Act, or Shadow and Act. It was a long essay he wrote. And he describes how he was massively influenced by T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. And he said he was a young man and black man growing up. I think he was in Harlem at that point, or he might still been in the South. But he's T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. It's not current, it's not the usual fare for someone in his position to read. And he said he liked it because it was so A, unusual, B, it seemed to be the literary equivalent of jazz riffs. He said it riffed, it felt like jazz to him. And he said he had no other option but to constantly look up. And if you're familiar with The Wasteland, most editions of The Wasteland, 2/3 of the book are notes and annotations. The actual poem isn't that long,
Yeah.
but it's so. And the response today seems to be, well, it's not worth the effort. Or to go back to the point about the influencer, I'd make a slightly different point this time. Hannah Arendt, the famous writer, I think she was the one who wrote Eichmann in Jerusalem. She wrote an essay called, I think it was called The Crisis in Culture. And she said, a great work of art or literature can survive centuries of oblivion and neglect, but it's an open question as to whether it can survive an entertaining version of what it has to say. So it's actually better if no one reads James Joyce for 500 years. The hope is eventually he'll be rediscovered. The worst possible thing is you make James Joyce the musical.
Or you just hand it over to Netflix
Yeah.
and see what they do with it.
And
I
people
think
think they're getting the benefits of literature when actually the literature's being destroyed. And this is my non popular view. It's better that people don't read at all than, for example, if you ever sit on a train and see an adult reading Harry Potter, I just want to punch them in the head and say, you're an adult. Stop reading a kid's book, you prat.
I never got the Harry Potter thing. I just couldn't wrap my head around it. I tried reading it because my friends loved it, and I was like, I don't want to read about these stupid brats. Magic brats. That's what it should be called. Harry Potter and the Magic Brat. There's a comment that's pinned here. It's been pinned here for a while. It says "Bad for Your Eyes" by Ztad5267. I
How
think
do
you
I get rid
accidentally
of it?
clicked it before.
Oh, God. It just. Why am I allowed near?
I don't
Removed from
know.
stage. Oh, God.
All you need to do is just click on another comment,
I
and
just.
that's gone.
I removed you. I said removed from. Oh, it just brings on another one.
So if you click over to the right, it will say where there's three dots on the comment. It should
Yeah.
allow you to just remove it.
You say that, don't you? But I can't.
Oh well, we could just have a different comment up, I suppose.
Or I can accidentally delete you again.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, God. This is just.
So while Paul is dealing with that, I just want to say how outraged I was to find yet again white authors stealing from black authors, much like,
Yes!
well done. Well done. Get in. Much like Cormac McCarthy with The Road clearly stole from Octavia Butler with their Parable of the Talents, here we can see Anthony Burgess in his writing of Clockwork Orange. He's never given credit to Mr. Ellison in his description of the hospital inside of the paint factory where Beethoven plays, and he's shocked until his personality is eroded by doctors who tell him, don't worry, you'll be better after this painful procedure. Would the white man stop stealing from the black man? It's an outrage, or woman in that case. What do you think about that, Paul?
No, there are so many vignettes, and the other aspect I was going to mention was his use of in a future video. I'm going to talk about the difference between totems and idols in primitive cultures,
Mm.
and I love the way he uses certain objects. So there's the briefcase that's like a totemic article that he carries around with him. There's the brilliant incident where the guy, Brother Jack's glass eye falls out.
Mm.
And the eye is obviously totemic about this theme about being seen and invisibility. There's the leg iron. What's the name of the guy? Is it Trop or Tarp? Brother Tarp has a leg iron that he escaped from a chain gang and he's kept it as a memento. And he gives it to the protagonist. So the protagonist carries that around with him. There's the paper doll that Clifton makes dance, and it's a symbol of him selling out and leaving the Brotherhood. There are all these objects that are imbued with meaning.
There's the letters by Bledsoe to help him
Yeah,
get jobs as well. 7 letters to 7 friends. Yeah. Yeah,
that was
there's
a nasty thing, wasn't it? Because I remember I once was in the office at university that will remain nameless, and the secretary had gone out, and there was a file, my file, and I actually looked at a reference that had been written for me by someone I thought was massively in my corner.
yeah.
And it wasn't nasty, but it was as uncommittal as you could possibly be. And I was really shocked. And so that's such a minor example of what he must have felt when this guy's gone absolutely out of his way. And it was even more of a betrayal because Dr. Bledsoe, the whole reason that worked was he knew that the protagonist would never open the envelopes.
Yes.
And he only found out because the son of one of the guys told him. Remember, the guy tells him, I've forgotten his name, is it Summers or something? He actually says, he opened the letter that was addressed to his own father and then tells him this is what's been happening.
There was a Dostoevsky level of malevolence in Bledsoe and pure resentment. And I knew when he said, we have these 7 letters, don't open them, don't read them. White folks are really particular about that kind of thing. And I was like, I think he's just given him 7 drops of poison to hand out. Evil, just evil, but like some perverse malice. It's almost like he's seeing a younger version of himself and wants to hobble that younger version of himself. So he became cynical. Bledsoe became cynical and just allowed himself to be absorbed into the system and found a place in the system. And he doesn't like this young pretender's level of optimism and hopefulness. So he wants to break it in him. It's horrifying.
Well, I just love the theme of vision, and then I don't know whether you remember, but in the dream sin that Jim Trueblood describes, one of the images he uses, he talks about being paralyzed and not being able to move, and he says that it's like a jaybird that's been stung by these poisonous insects.
Yellow
And
jackets.
yeah, the yellow jackets sting it, and he said, and the only part of the jaybird that's not paralyzed are its eyes, so it can see itself being paralyzed. And that knocked me for 6 in the sense that it's inverted commas just a jaybird. But what a horrible, horrible image.
Yeah.
And it's a nuanced addition to this idea because the whole book's about people not seeing. That's the one image where someone can see with perfect clarity. And what can they see? Their own paralysis.
That's where I thought that Trueblood was secretly really, really clever, because he then segues from that into saying that originally, like, sorry for people, trigger warning, he was moving, and then he woke up in horror to realize that he was with his daughter, and then he tells the Jaybird Yellow Jacket story, and then he says, and then my daughter started to move, and she wouldn't let me go. So he's saying he said, if I move, it's a sin, and I don't know what to do. I want to remove myself physically from the sin, so I stay totally still. Jaybird story. But then my daughter, she's saying, she says, oh daddy, and then she starts to move. And so the implication is, at that point, that this was something that she wanted. Now, he never once says it was her fault, but he tells that part of the story. He could, whether it's true or not. There's so many unreliable narrators here. Whether it's true or not, why does he have to say that? Why does he have to say that right after giving this horrifying image?
But it's also the dream. If I didn't realize when I reread it, the number of times the word dream or dreamlike or images of surreal, non-realistic scenes are occurring. And that goes to my point about what I loved about the book is, for someone, just to repeat, I normally don't like descriptions of surrealism. I find it really, boring and tiresome. But he actually portrays with immense psychological realism how we perceive the world around us in such accuracy. So one little example is, I think I used it in one of my videos. I think he's driving Mr. Norton away after the debacle at Golden Day. And he talks about how he's holding the steering wheel and he's looking at the white line in the road and his eyes fill up with tears. And he describes how the world becomes liquid and snowy because of his tears, even though it's summer. And I just thought, what an amazingly accurate, if your eyes welled up with tears, that is how you would see the world. You wouldn't see it with crystal clarity. You wouldn't see it like through binoculars. And I think he's brilliant at describing how realistically seeing the world is not the same as accurately seeing the world.
I'm just looking up. I'm pretty sure in the Paint Factory on the issue of whiteness, because the word white is obviously used very carefully in the book, and whiteness is it goes over the white lines, and then he goes over the white boundary, the white man's boundary, and then he's blinded by whiteness. Isn't there a line in the Paint Factory? Obviously, he has to add black chemicals to make the white just a little bit of black comes to make the white truly white. And isn't the line something like optic white is the right white, or is
Yeah,
it
and
optic? Yeah.
yeah, and it's the janitor, not the janitor, the engineer without qualifications, who's the
Mm,
anti-union guy, is the
mm,
one that came up with that
mm.
slogan. Who's a bit like, he reminds me of the Quentin Tarantino's. It's Stephen, the house slave, who seems to hate other black people.
Oh yeah. I just watched that again the other day.
Is it Samuel Jackson
Samuel
plays the role?
Jackson's, he's so good.
He's so good. I actually, that scared me, that portrayal.
Yeah, it's so ghoulish as well. They've given him a bit of makeup to age him, but the way he moves his face for the whole every single fucking scene he's in, he's monstrous. He's just a ghoulish, evil fucking turncoat bastard. Even when I can't remember Candy's name when he dies, he calls him by his first name and holds him and sobs after he's been shot, and he's genuinely distraught. He's
And
genuinely.
what's brilliant about that is, again,
Mm,
psychologically, it's more accurate when people over-identify, when they go down a wrong path and then over-identify, and that becomes their self-definition.
mm,
They lose Stephen, the house slave in Django Unchained. It's an incredibly realistic portrayal of somebody who has genuinely psychologically lost the plot because they've so invested in the wrong path that becomes their own identity. And I think that's a major theme of Invisible Man. The roles people play, and he portrays these intelligent, disproportionately white people in the Brotherhood, aka the Communist Party in America at the time.
mm,
And it reminded me, it's today's ideological battles. So little of today's political discussion is actual genuine politics. It's your
mm.
point about teams. It's ideology, to a point that in my lifetime I've witnessed over decades. I think this is what's most dispiriting about contemporary times. The lack. I don't mind disagreement at all. It's the lifeblood of democracy. It's moved. It's not disagreement anymore. It's intransigence meets intransigence, and the tribes aren't speaking to each other at all.
Mm.
And that can only lead down a disastrous route. And I don't see it getting any better. It just seems, with online media and so on, it seems to be getting worse and worse and worse. I don't see a way out. And I think Ellison's writing about this at the beginning of the process. So you remember, it was published in 1952. If you think, it's about when TV, a decade or so later, is about to take off. I think he's identifying the groundswell of some of these trends.
Yes. Um, Obviously, it's a bit cliche to blame everything on social media, but I do think social media has been a massive accelerant in that, and I suspect it's probably from a principle of punishment, where people fear being ostracized from their tribe more than anything else. And if you don't just blindly hate the opposition, you would be accused of a lack of commitment to the cause, or of being Stephen, a house N word, and of identifying with the oppressor, and of being trauma bonded to them through narcissistic abuse, and of fused and blended with the psychopathic narcissistic slave owners mindset, as a means of surviving, as a means of getting by, instead of choosing, at the very least, obedience, but a kind of resentful obedience, or as the grandfather suggests, what would that be? That's malignant compliance. Smile them to death, agree with them to death.
Agree
Do
them
as
to
they
death
say,
and destroy them, yeah.
destroy them, because he's regretting a life of cowardice. He's regretting a life of not fighting. But as the book reminds us, so he's writing in 1952. His grandfather was born a slave. That's how recent it was.
No, I'm thinking the vignettes are particularly, inverted commas, like, but are truly horrific. So I do think the first three chapters, including the prologue, are the most impressive.
if you filmed the battle royale, and also you mentioned him being a public speaker, he has the most awful, traumatic, soul assaulting experience in his first role as a public speaker, which he thought was going to be his opportunity to be heard and maybe engage in good faith debate, as you've just said. And actually, the whole point of it was to mock him and to just laugh at him for thinking that he's being clever. It's like teaching a parrot to talk. The rich white men who've just had him and his colleagues be blindfolded and punch the fuck out of each other. He thinks he's allowed to leave. They drag him back in, and they say, "Oh, that speech you were so excited to do. Now do that speech. Now do it." And they talk over him. They laugh at him. They question his use of complicated language. Like, where did you learn this? Where did you learn social justice? Where did you learn the word equality? And it's just the whole thing is so fucking hard to watch. It's so humiliating. But that's what I wanted to say to you before. It sounds otherworldly. That's where I got the Steppenwolf thing. Are we supposed to think this really happened, or is this the big dream? Is it symbolic, or are we supposed to take this as, yeah, this is a thing that actually happened?
No, I think the battle royale, the way they described the stripper, and what I found most affecting about that whole scene, I don't know whether affecting is the right word, but the way in which you've been in mostly male. I in the past I've been to an awful lot of football matches when football hooliganism was still rife.
Mhm.
So I've been accidentally caught in the middle of a football riot. So I've got a very strong sense of raw, and you from your background in a different way from martial arts and stuff, but you've witnessed raw animal male aggression.
Mm,
And what I found fascinating about the whole battle royale wasn't even so much the violence. They voyeuristically made the black boys fight each other and electrocuted them and got sadistic enjoyment from that. But the white businessmen, and I think they even said there was a pastor or two in there,
mm, mm,
they they basically chased the stripper
mm,
and got and one, at least one of them grabbed her, and it
mm,
begs the question: if someone hadn't got her out, what would have happened?
mm,
And I think that is something in literature that doesn't often get portrayed realistically in a crowd, because later on in the riots in Harlem, there's a sense of what a crowd can do.
mm,
But in that more self-enclosed, nearly, well, it was all white businessmen and community figures. What was so startling is they're supposed to be the cream of the society,
mm.
and they are one whiskey or two away from being feral animals.
Oh yeah, gang sexual assault.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen, but it could. You're right. They physically pick her up, and as a group, they throw
Yeah.
her up and down,
And then
which
she, the
is,
way it's described, apologies, I've got it wrong, but someone actually gets her out the room, and there's the implication you don't know what would have happened if she wasn't gotten out the room.
yeah, 100%, 100%.
And again, I think when I talked earlier on about, the art is ascetic and unashamed, it's unashamed to actually address that level of feral evil that
Mm,
exists in, and I just re-emphasize, it's the most privileged people in that community. It's the fact that these are the creme de la creme of that particular community, and they are just as feral as Jim Trueblood, if not worse.
mm,
And that's what most literature doesn't address, or that's what most discussions sanitize. You'll never get a political discussion on TV that would ever come within 100 miles of recognizing that psychological truth.
mm,
And again,
mm,
it's a roundabout way of talking about, you mentioned earlier on, mental health problems, young people. Part of it to me is that these are truths that Ellison's writing about, that when you repress, when you don't talk about them, when you don't write about them honestly, they go subterranean. And that, again, I can't see how psychologically that's healthy. Let's pretend not to, let's pretend these things don't exist, and let's not talk about them.
I was wondering when I was watching. sorry, watching. I'm very visual. I wanted to film it, like some of the scenes. I was like, how would you film this? How would you film the True Blood scene? How would you film the boxing scene? The paint factory scene, the hospital. I'm not being facetious. I genuinely think Anthony Burgess was inspired by that because it's too close. It's way too close. And I was thinking, it made me think along the same lines as you. Are we actually more repressed now than we were then, but in a different way? So yes, I can swear. I can go on YouTube and I can swear and I can talk about my favorite sexual positions and my porn addiction and that. You know, you can. I could be a YouTube influencer and literally make pornography. I could literally be making pornography. So you go, well, this must be the peak of sexual liberation. I was saying, but it's not though, is it? It's what's the freedom that they would have had in 1952 that we don't have now? I know something's missing, but I can't put my finger on it.
Well, Jean Baudrillard said that he wrote the very funny. I can't remember the precise paper he wrote it in, but he describes this scenario in which it's just so French. There are all these Gaulois smoking French people at a swingers party. And
Mm,
over the back of one woman, one of the guys says to the other one, "What are you doing after the orgy?"
mm,
And Baudrillard, I think it was Baudrillard. He's just apologies if I've misremembered. I'm senile. I get excused, but it's that level of it's the boredom of being
mm,
at an orgy
mm,
and saying, "What are you doing afterwards?" It's
mm,
you've reached peak transgression. And
mm,
the answer to your question is what's lacking? What's lacking today is good old fashioned repression. Without repression, if everything's allowed, it's a spin on what Dostoevsky says in Brothers Karamazov. If
mm.
everything's allowed, life's boring.
Yes, I don't. Yes, it's been on my mind as well. I don't know if we discussed this on YouTube channel or maybe we only discussed this privately. It is not very erotic to be with somebody where on the first date everything is permitted. It almost collapses the sexual tension instead of elevating it because there's no boundaries to push beyond across time. We just start with anything and everything you want. Okay.
Someone's making a comment. I think he's going on a gay issue about with repression came oppression against gay people and stuff. But one of the examples I think Zizek uses it is you remember the film Brief Encounter? Would you
Yeah.
like another cup of tea, darling?
Yes.
Yes, darling. Well, Zizek argues it's incredibly popular in the gay community because it's repressed and the
Mm,
relationship they have is never consummated.
mm,
And there's a subset within the gay community who lived through the oppressive times, who
mm,
actually said it was exciting.
mm,
It was, for all its horrors, it had an excitement that it doesn't exist today because it's almost, if you're a middle class white couple, if your child isn't homosexual, then you've
mm.
let someone down somewhere.
I don't know if you're a fan of stand-up comedy, but Louis C.K. does a good bit about this, where he was saying if you're gay, it must have been better before, where being gay was the worst thing imaginable. I mean, who wants to go home and, as a man, do you want to go home and have sex with your, make love to your husband, or do you want to get caught at a club doing something that would destroy your mother's life, that would make your father so upset? And he was like, this the real sexual tension is in the transgression, but you
Yeah.
can't have transgression without repression. Also, to the person who said transgression equals oppression, when we're discussing it here, the word repression, transgression, we just got that psychoanalytic layer to it. So it's more in a Freudian sense, like the repression of a natural drive, not the government or a community repressing you necessarily. It's more in the sense of like the self editing, the inner policeman.
Yeah, but it's just a basic human psychological truth. If there is a government repressing,
Mm,
and so, for example, it's not quite repression, but I remember reading lots of psychological accounts of people in the Second World War saying civilians in Britain, even in the middle of the Blitz, they were saying, of course, you're having your major capital city, and Liverpool also bombed within an inch of its life.
mm,
I'm not advocating that as a wonderful thing, but they just said one of the things people didn't often talk about was how much more alive people felt in everyday life. And
I've one.
you had women in the workplace that were never
Mm,
allowed previously in the workplace, and they said once the war ended and after the initial, D-Day celebrations, there was this
mm.
massive sense of anticlimax. Sorry, I interrupted.
No, no, no. I was just going to add to it. Talking about wanting to make films and things. There's a documentary that I'd like to make, and it would be easy enough to do because I have the contacts in Sarajevo where you can go and talk to survivors of the siege who will tell you privately that obviously it was awful, as you've just said. Nobody's saying it's good, but some of the most exciting, uh, just intense, life intense experiences were had under those conditions of absolute barbarity and chaos. But there's people who will tell you privately that not that they miss it, but they think fondly. They think fondly of some of the elements of that time. The challenge would be to get them to say it on camera, because then other people say, "How could you possibly?" Like if I could, I've heard plenty of stories like that, plenty of stories, and it's from recent history. So yeah, 100% believe it, and there would be an excitement in it. We are bonded by a common enemy. It's a good match evolutionarily for what we are as a creature. We're living under imminent threat. We're bonded by a common enemy, and we're going to move together as a defined tribe. There's no defined tribe now. There's no common enemy. There's just mush, slop. And I think it's an evolutionary. We're not a good evolutionary match for the environment that the technology has allowed us to create.
Yeah, there's an idiot in the chat. I'll call him an idiot because he just isn't getting what we're talking about. We're not defending all of this. We're just pointing out part of human psychology is this irrationality. So you need danger.
Who is it?
Um, Mountain climbing, freeform mountain climbing. Why on earth would you do that? And then I'm gonna do a video on. I did one in the past. There's this Finnish philosopher who did a thing about desire, and he was making the point about people creating scenarios in which you can desire certain things. He talks
Mm,
about safety, for example, and he makes a very funny observation. People do incredibly dangerous sports in the safest way possible. So you'll do some type of mountaineering, but you'll wear a helmet.
mm.
Where if you think about it, the obviously sensible thing is don't go mountaineering.
This is coffee without caffeine.
Yeah, but it's the point that consequences can be catastrophic. We're not saying
Mm,
they're not,
mm,
but it's this people put themselves in positions they need the threat of catastrophe to feel fully alive. Doesn't mean it's healthy, doesn't mean it's right, doesn't mean that we're supporting it. We're just saying this is the type of thing Ellison, in a different way, is talking about.
mm,
Psychologically realistic scenarios that may be psychologically true. He's not proposing or purporting them. And
mm,
this is one of the things that just depresses me about modern society. It's you can't talk about things. People do not understand the distinction between a justification and an explanation. You can't explain anything without being accused of justifying it.
Well, I think we just talked about a scene of pretty intense incest, and obviously we were talking about that because we think incest is super cool. What else could you conclude? We also think racism and institutional violence super cool because we discussed it. That means we advocate for it.
Anything else you wanted to say about it?
Um, it was. I'm glad you got me to read it. It's another one of them where I was reading it and I was thinking, "Fucking hell, why has he got me reading this?" I'm sad that I didn't know anything about it because it's a really, really brilliant book. And until you brought it up, I had literally never heard of it.
Yeah, I'm just wondering at the most basic, stupid level. I think it's not helped the title. I think people just confuse it with the Invisible Man by H.G. Wells.
Mm,
So I just wish it had a different title. But I am. It's not unknown. It's a Penguin modern classic, but it does nothing shocks me anymore because I'm just miserable, but I'm misanthropic. But it does bewilder me that it's not better known.
Yeah, it's brilliantly written. It's multi-layered. It's it's got to be one of the smartest uh, books I've ever read, and I rushed through the last quarter to get it read in time, and I wasn't digesting it, and I knew that what I was taking on was rich. I knew it was nutrient dense, and I wasn't fully digesting it. It takes a bit of thinking. But like I said, it did affect my dreams, which means it speaks to the unconscious, which I think is an indication that it's a really, really well constructed piece of literature.
Yeah, and the only other thing, well, I'm preaching to the choir, but I think why I'm quite evangelical about it and proselytize about it is that I can think of better books. I can think of books that aren't as literary but are more entertaining. But I can't think of many books that combine literary quality with beautiful writing, with being entertaining. And I'm not saying it's an easy read, but for the quality of the writing you're getting, it's not James Joyce level of difficulty.
Yeah.
So, in terms of, bang for your buck, and I just think it's the universal aspect of it. And that's what saddens me. I think I was going to say it's in a ghetto.
Oh,
Bad choice of
careful.
phrase, but
Careful.
it risks being in a literary ghetto because the very fact that you and I could say, "Oh, should two white guys discuss this book?" is sad.
Yeah, it is sad. And it went around in my head for 2 weeks, and I was like, no, you're right, we shouldn't. But then after that, I was thinking that we shouldn't worry about that. But then after reading the book, I was totally certain with it. I was like, no, that's not how the author would want us to be filtering this. I don't think.
Which I'm just to finish. I don't want to drag this out and keep you too long. But while I was rereading it, I watched the Netflix series on P Diddy, and that I found interesting because that I would love Ellison to do like a long form commentary essay on the whole P Diddy phenomenon, and
Mm,
I would P Diddy seems to represent the absolute antithesis of everything Ellison stood for
mm,
and everything Ellison was trying to portray. So Ellison doesn't soft soap the black community whatsoever. He's
mm,
brutally honest. But the worst aspects of the black community in America are channeled through P. Diddy's behavior and how he started off his career. I don't know how much have you seen the series, the Netflix series?
no, no, no.
Well, I didn't know this, but at the very beginning of his career, he organized a basketball event, and 9 people died in a crush because it was so badly organized. And
Mm,
this ironically was one of the things that made him famous.
didn't know
And
that.
what I'm arguing is that there was a whole. I know next to nothing about rap, so I need to be careful what I say. But there's the gangster and psychoanalyzing P Diddy. His father was a gangster type who died before he ever really knew him, and he seemed to be living out that gangster fantasy about his father.
Mm,
And this goes into Ellison's books all about how we either subordinate ourselves to stereotypes or we manage to free ourselves and how we achieve genuine diversity.
mm,
And there's certain aspects of the rap community that's being described in that Netflix series that is just pure, unadulterated self indulgence and people not being held to account because it's this self justifying, they've become famous, and this obsession with fame for its own sake and fame as a value. There's
mm,
no substance to it beyond, and I'm not singling out rap culture because how many reality TV programs are there about people wanting to be in successful bands?
mm,
It's a societal wide thing,
mm.
but there are so few Ralph Ellisons in that community, and I find that just deeply
Oh,
depressing.
they got rid of them. I mean, they were there in the beginning, but they just either got actively ignored or crushed out, and there was just cynically created whole cloth groups echoing a certain message because it didn't start like that. It didn't start as gangsterism and thuggery and promiscuity at all. That wasn't the original, but it got taken over. And I don't think you're criticizing rap culture, because you could argue that rap culture is all popular culture, and all popular culture is it's all the same thing. It's all the same homogenous slop. It's ultra materialistic. It's ultra narcissistic. It's psychopathic. It's hyper
Yeah, I think,
competitive.
sorry, I was struggling to find the right way of couching it. I think what I'm saying is, in terms of Ellison's book,
Mm,
what annoyed me most about the whole P. Diddy phenomenon was he wrote that whole book to
mm,
attack stereotypes and to attack when you suborn yourself to a stereotype,
mm,
you're losing your self identity twofold
mm,
because you're further subordinating yourself to the person who's created the stereotype and polices the stereotype.
mm,
And this is my problem with P. Diddy and this whole gangster crap. The West Coast, East Coast controversy was manufactured.
100%.
And it was used. And Ellison describes real visceral violence. He
Mm,
describes real, nasty, nasty fights. But none of it is confected. None of it is manufactured. If it's not, it's genuinely authentic violence
mm,
that stems from genuinely authentic violent times and
mm,
violent political situation.
mm,
It's not multimillionaire rappers creating this gangster pseudo faux danger
mm.
to sell yet more records.
Yeah, yeah. That's a
I
good
was I
point.
was I was just interested how annoyed, and I think it was just bad timing. I'm watching the P Diddy after reading Ellison, and it wasn't a good match.
Mm. Why did Ellison even bother if you're going to act like that? Yeah, no, I hear you. I hear you. It
But
is.
it does beg the question, doesn't it? What would Ellison have written
Mm,
given that he was such a gifted writer? I can just see him writing about P Diddy in such an amazing way that
mm,
the fact that he got off so lightly, he got sentenced, I think, for 50 months, including time served.
right.
And they interviewed some of the jurors, and they just seemed starstruck.
Mm, mm.
Just deeply depressing. And I don't quite know how I've gone from Ellison to P. Diddy, but
Man's
right.
strive for authenticity. That's what it's all about.
Well, I enjoyed that, mate.
Thank you very much.
So I think our next one's in January when we'll be looking at with our friend Darren, H.G. Wells,
War of the Worlds.
War of the Worlds.
Lovely
So
stuff.
if people are up for that, it's Darren. It's McGee, isn't it? I always get his name wrong.
McGee. Darren McGee.
Darren McGee. So there'll be three of us discussing H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, and it's quite short up from memory.
Yeah, it's a short book, yeah.
And I've got some interesting lines I can take on it. So hopefully it'll be an enjoyable event. So thank you for everyone who participated, and I will see you all soon. And on Richard's channel, the Philosophy channel, my channel, Readers of the Lost Art, all the very best. Take care. Bye.